Do you want to live a stable and healthy life? Do you want to have the right priorities in your life? And do you want to grow in the right direction? Well, if you answered yes to any of these questions, you have to have boundaries in your life. In fact, today we're going to be talking about having and maintaining healthy boundaries. You know, I used to have a neighbor he was right next to me, and he would come into my house when I was working on my house. And I had my door open because I wanted a little bit of a breeze to come in. But one time he came in and he started to criticize all the things that I was doing in my house. And I was thinking, where in the heck did this guy come from? I didn't invite him in. You know, he came in and he kind of sounded like, I don't like these blinds. These blinds aren't fantastic. Quite frankly, they don't sit right. He was giving me every excuse. And I had to just kick him out. I was like, you can't be in my house without asking for permission. You know, he walked into my house, and when he did that, he was crossing a boundary line, right? So he could walk anywhere outside, but once he got to my front door, there was a boundary line that he crossed over from a place where everyone's allowed to go to a place where I have to give permission for someone to go. And you know, when it comes to putting boundaries in our life, all it means is that we're putting limitations in place for a reason. And a lot of people think that boundaries are selfish. They think that you have to do everything all the time. But listen to me. If you have to do everything, there's no need for God. You know, God created you to do something, but you don't have to do everything. We need to stay healthy. So don't think of a boundary as walling yourself off from people. Think of it more as a door that you can open and a door that you can close, allowing the things that are healthy and beneficial into your life and keeping the things that aren't out. It's really important. And this gives you free control to pick what you will accept and won't accept in your life. We have been given a free will gift from God. God gave you free will for a reason. He wants you to choose life, Deuteronomy says. So how do we do that? We make wise choices. So why is it important to have boundaries? Well, the first reason we want to have boundaries is so that we can be stable and healthy. Last week, I bought a big bag of lemons. I was going to use them in juices and in food. And what happened was, when I was excited to get it, I grabbed one and it was all mushy. And I was like, this thing's rotten. And all the other ones started to rot too. And you know what I learned from that? Being too close to the wrong people or the wrong things can ruin you. I had all these lemons. I was going to make some lemonade, but now I couldn't even make lemonade out of lemons. So being too close to the wrong things can ruin your life. You know, there was a study that I read this week that said you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. You know, why is that? You might think, well, I can hang out with people at a bar and not drink. I could go to this place and not do what they're doing. Well, my friend, I have to say that you're absolutely wrong, and this is why. Your friends, the 5 people you hang out with the most, determine what conversations dominate your attention. Have you thought about that? You don't bring up all the topics in the conversation. So what are people that are unhealthy going to talk about all the time? Unhealthy things, and they're going to pull you into it. Not only that, but they determine which attitudes and behavior you are regularly exposed to. You know, the Bible talks about not befriending an angry person. Why? Because then we will take on their characteristics. So eventually, over time, you will think and behave like the people closest to you. That's why it's important to have a boundary in your life. To say, you're welcome into my life, you're not healthy, you have to stay out at the front door. It's not selfish. You're protecting what God has put in your life. So this is the same reason why drug addicts go to rehab. You know, a drug addict doesn't go to another drug house after they've been overdosed. They go to a place where they're surrounded by people who are focused on their well-being. And you know what? That's what we need to do. We need to only allow people into our lives that love Jesus, have a positive attitude, and want what's best for me. Now, does that mean that we don't talk to unbelievers? No, it's just the opposite. But we want to have our close circle really tight and healthy. Boundaries help us to live a healthy life. So, you know, this means that in order for someone to get to spend more time with you, they have to show you those principles. They have to show you that they love Jesus and are positive people and are going to add value to your life. This is what God says about this in 1 Corinthians 15:33. He says, bad company corrupts good character. So who in your life do you need to put a boundary on so they don't end up ruining you? Remember the bag of lemons? I had a rotten lemon. It made all the other lemons rotten. Who in your life do you need to put a boundary on? Proverbs 22:24 says what we just talked about. Don't befriend angry people or associate with hot-tempered people. 2 Corinthians 6:14 says it like this. Don't be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? We need to be set apart so that we can shine for Jesus Christ. But the Bible says that the heart is the wellspring of your life, and you need to guard your heart. You need to protect your heart. So what things in your life do you need to put a boundary on so that you can do that? You don't have to feel ashamed. You don't have to feel bad or guilty that there's some people you're going to spend less time with. It's important so that you can remain healthy. If there was a rabid wild dog that ran into your house, what would you do? Would you let it just keep running around? No, you would kick it out of the house and you would close the door and you would lock it. So if you want to live a healthy and stable life, you need to put boundaries in place. Boundaries on things and people that are toxic and unhelpful in your life. What's the second thing that you need to do? Having boundaries helps me to live wisely and prioritize my life. Did you know every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else? Literally, you only have 24 hours in a day. Nobody has a magic equation to get a couple extra hours. We are limited to a certain amount of time. If I say yes to a priority, I have to figure out what I'm going to say no to. So to make sure that the main thing stays the main thing, we have to say no to lesser priorities. We have to put a boundary marker on those things. We only have limited amount of time and energy. In the morning, a couple months ago, I remember I didn't have a boundary on the things that were most important to me. So in the morning, I would wake up and I would get emails in my inbox and I would get people calling me. And before I knew it, I was just serving everyone else's emergencies. And I wasn't actually doing the things that God had me do. And because of that, I felt really spread thin. Have you ever felt spread thin? Today, if you're spread thin, it means that you're just giving your attention to too many things. So ask yourself, what things in my life do I need to cancel out so that I can give more attention to the more important things? What are those important things for you? It was hard for me because I felt like I was just going along with the flow of life, going through the motions. But the way that you stop going through the motions is you set up a boundary and you prioritize what's most important in your life. Ephesians 5:15 through 18 says this, be very careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. Do you see what he's saying there? He's saying, know what you're here for. Focus on your first priorities. Set a boundary on the things that aren't helpful. Here in this verse, he talks about two activities, and we can see God showing us what that boundary looks like. He said, do not get drunk on wine. So it's like, ignore that part. And he says, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. So what is that thing in your life that God is trying to X out? What is the thing that God is trying to put back into your life? What is he having you focus on? It's not easy to try to figure out what those things are, but there's two questions to help you get clear on your life and put boundaries on unhelpful and unimportant tasks. The first one is, what do I sense or feel God is asking me to do? Have you ever taken time to just pause and just think, what is it that God really wants me to do? I read the Bible every single day, probably for about 30 minutes. And sometimes I read a chapter and I just blow through it, or I blow through my reading and I don't even remember what the heck I read. Sometimes I have to slow down and I have to ask the question, like, what have I been reading? Like, what's going on? I think we need to do that for ourselves in our direction too. We need to slow down and we need to ask ourselves, like, where am I going? Where am I at right now and where am I going? What does God want me to do? What are the things in the past that I need to move away from to move into that future? And second, what's getting in the way of doing that? You have to figure out what's on the surface, what's deeper than that. What's getting in the way, what's blocking it? Because there's something special and unique that God has created you to do. There is no one like you. You have a unique thumbprint, eye print, heartbeat. There's no one else. Even identical twins don't have the same thumbprints. Isn't that crazy? God made you specifically for a reason. Friend, I don't want you to miss it. I don't want you to get so busy with the minutia and the minute things that you forget the bigger calling that God has put on your life. You have to go and serve God with everything that you've got. And there's some things, my friend, that are in your life that are blocking you from doing that. So you have to ask yourself, what is it that I was put on this earth to do? And figure that out. And secondly, what's getting in the way of me doing that? For me, I wanted to have quiet times because my calling is to abide with Christ. Above any other calling I have in my life, my relationship with God is number one. He spoke that to me years ago. My calling is to abide, and out of that, I can live a fruitful life. So if my calling is to abide with Christ, to be connected to Him, what is that going to require? It's going to require me setting a boundary in the morning where nothing else can get on my schedule until I've had that quiet time with God. And my friends, I have been doing that. I do it every single morning. I don't miss a morning unless it's Sunday maybe or when I'm preaching. But every morning I have put a boundary on my life that says I'm not taking care of anything else until I get in the Word of God and I encourage someone else. That's just my boundary. What is your boundary? What are you going to put in place to protect the calling that God has put on your life? And the third reason why boundaries are so important is having boundaries keeps me going in the right direction. You know, once you sense what God is asking you to do, you need to put in place boundaries that will keep you going in that right direction. You know, when I lived in Africa, I was in Uganda, and every morning I would get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. I was like such an early riser because at night there's really nothing to do there. Here I'm like scrolling on my phone, but when I was in Africa, it's like we don't have any electricity, no running water. It's like nothing. It's like you go to bed at 9. I woke up at 5 and I would position myself under this tree. And this tree's purpose was to give me shade, right? The tree's purpose was to grow healthy fruit. It had a bunch of purposes. But what was interesting about this tree is that it needed these pillars to hold it up because the tree, for whatever reason, started growing in the right direction, but then it started to turn sideways, and the tree actually wanted to grow along the ground. I've never seen anything like it. So we put posts under the tree to help it continue to go in the right direction. So my friend, what are those posts in your life? Those are your boundaries. You need to grow in the right direction. You need to keep living that purpose that God created you for. And the only way that you're going to do it is by having boundaries in place. So my friend, what boundaries can you implement today that will keep you on the right track? You know, we're talking about boundaries and how important it is. I can't stress this enough. You only have a limited amount of time. Did you know that the average human lives about 30,000 days? That's it, 30,000 days. And that's if you're good. Think about that. After today, one of those is gone, then another one, then another one. Don't waste your life. The best way that you can live on purpose, the best way to stay healthy and to grow in the right direction is to have healthy boundaries.